So, but if we become violent or aggressive and harm others, no matter what the circumstance is, even if it's for somebody who's innocent, we shouldn't. Because then we're just showing, well, what they're doing is right if we fight back. And the virtue to that is meekness and peacemaking. And meekness is something that Christ, he showed that all through the time, all through the Bible. It talks kind of like how he was submissive. And meekness isn't weakness, it's you're submitting yourself to God. And he submitted himself all the way from the brutal beating he received in Gethsemane, all the way from carrying the cross in Calvary, and then being crucified on the cross. He didn't fight back. He was demonstrating meekness. And happy are those who are meek, for they will inherit the earth. And when Christ says that, he's not talking about this earth. He's talking about the new heaven and the new earth that's in store for us. So the peacemaking comes with, as you can see, peace is only between two people when God is involved. And if you look at our history in the past, we're plagued with wars. And you can see if God was in the center, that's true peace, not human, right? Because that's just a virtue. You're trying to be peace with others. But when God's involved, is in the center, it becomes a supernatural virtue. And other one I want to talk about sloth, which is spiritual laziness, which our greatest of joys, which is God, we find joyless. So now that kind of deters us from coming to Mass, coming to receive the sacraments. We start to become somewhat isolated from the church. We start to resort to, as we know, there's a lot of advancements in technology, computers, all these gadgets and things like that, trying to satisfy that emptiness, right? We try so hard, but it still does not satisfy the spirit, because the spirit, the main organ of the spirit, is the heart. And when we fall into spiritual laziness, it actually makes us fall into depression. It can make us fall into other things as well, into the flesh. So, talk about hunger and thirst for righteousness, which is, we ask the question, does God need food? Obviously, he doesn't. He's self-sufficient, as we need food. But God hungers for our love. And that's something that we have to try and see and through understanding that no matter how many of when we become spiritually lazy, that we're not satisfying any of we're trying to satisfy our human nature, but that doesn't satisfy the spirit. And next one we'll talk about is sin of lust, which is the sin of the flesh. So when it comes to that, is when we fall into that type of sin is when you're missing, anytime you're missing God's love, you're trying to replace it with sins of the flesh, and you're not really satisfying anything. You're becoming becomes an addiction after, and you become blind afterwards. Now you're unable to see God because you're lost in that sin. And purity of heart is now happy are those who are pure in heart, for they will see God. Now with the purity of heart, that is we see sometimes God lets us fall into the lesser sins so that we can gain humility, which really pride is, everybody has some more than others, so we all have it. And sometimes God lets us fall into the lesser sins so we can gain that pride. Gain that humility to overcome pride. So the last one I want to talk about is gluttony. And gluttony is excessive eating or drinking. And that could also, basically overindulging, let's say, in rich foods, or wanting to have food only certain types of food, things like this. And that can also lead to excessive like alcoholism. And really what that's doing is now we try to satisfy our body with all this food. And it's just as you can see, it was the Earth's natural resources, how we're consuming so much of it that we have to learn to not to do that. And the way to overcome this is through fasting. Dieting maybe is good, but through fasting, where we learn to appreciate the little that we have, and that's how we can work towards overcoming that. And the next one, the virtue to that is bearing persecution. As we know that Christ was rejected, and he tells us that no student is better than his master, right? So if he was persecuted, we will be persecuted also. And bearing persecution really deprives us of even the basic necessities. And a lot of times we find it difficult through any setting, whether it's at work or family members or friends, to actually preach the Word of God. But when you are receiving persecution, it's a blessing, and a blessing here on earth and in heaven. So it's important to not be shy, to try to speak when you can. It's, as you can see, the saints, the church itself is going through persecution, right? With the death of, like, the martyrs, right? The saints, which are the seeds, the church of the church. But the church is going through a purification phase right now too. So, and some of the saints that got killed actually were in joy, because, well, what's the worst that can happen to you if you're preaching the Word of God? You can be killed, right? So that's the worst thing that can happen. But then, you have, you could possibly inherit the kingdom of heaven, right? The kind of to summarize everything, in this modern era, we see that we're lacking virtue, right? We're so advanced in technology and all of these things, but what we're lacking is basically, a lot of times we say, well, it's just, when you talk, like, even, it's even in schools too, now it's just mainly just your opinion. But when you're talking about God, humanity hasn't changed, right? It's always from what God created before, and now the virtues still apply. You can't just say it's your opinion. You have to say this is how it is. And I think religion brings virtue. Virtue, we have, the chance of saving earth itself, which is, I could sense, it's near the end times now, because you can see through, with with this advancement in technology, we're really not knowing what to do with it. But if we have virtue, then we would use it for the right reasons. As you can see how the earth itself is being polluted. The use of fossil fuels and natural resources are at stake, and we have to learn to use, be more self-efficient, and use only what we need, and find ways of better for the air and the climate to possibly get away from those things. But I'm trying to think what else I want to say. I think that's everything. Does anybody have questions? No?
Thanks, Sam.
Okay.
Yes. Like to